Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nick Roy. I work at Encora Publishing, Safe and Civil Schools. And today we have a webinar with Anita Archer, Explicit Instruction webinar. So please know that we are recording the webinar, so in case you have to leave halfway through, you can come back and check it out by visiting our website. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Anita.
Thank you, Nick, and good afternoon to all of you. I am blessed this day to be in Portland, Oregon. It's almost a sunny day, and this is a really good topic. I've had a number of people email me and say, what should I say if a participant says this? What should I say if a participant says this? So I am going to be doing a webinar today on myths in education, and I'm going to also do it next time. So if you want a myth that you want me to address, you just let me know. And, you know, I sort of thought maybe it should be called misconceptions because it is simply practices and belief systems that we use again and again that are not supported by educational research. But why a myth? Well, like a myth, the story is told again and again and again and again and again and again, and pretty soon we have that as a strong belief. But our job as educators is to really look at what leads to learning. And even if I'm in a district that says, oh, you should do this, I better look at the research and say, is it a misconception? Is it a myth? And should I instead utilize what I know from research on instruction? Well, today we are going to, on January 15th, 2019, we're going to look at two myths, and one is students learn best when they discover things on their own, which is very central misconception to explicit instruction. The other one we're going to look at is one that has been around again and again and again throughout my career, and it is reaching up again. And that is students learn better when they're taught using their preferred learning style. So those are the two we're going to be working on. I'm going to stop occasionally and have you do retrieval practice and retrieve the big ideas, so be ready for that, and also be ready to enter a chat answer in some cases. So let's look at the first one, and to keep yourself totally present, you can read along with me. Students learn best when they discover things on their own. Certainly, many teachers have this belief, many administrators have this belief, but we better check it out against the research. Now, people who have that belief assume that when the children discover things, they're going to learn more, they're going to retain more, and they're going to transfer more information if they discover it versus be explicitly taught the information. So one of the glories of doing these webinars is it forces me to read a lot. So as I read all of these studies and reviews of research, I thought maybe we just better be certain we're on the same track. So throughout this, we're going to have many of the articles talk about unguided instruction, which would be discovery, or minimally guided instruction, which would also be sort of discovery plus that the students be involved in. And within this quote of note, they define this as one in which learners, rather than being presented with essential information, must discover or construct essential information for themselves. So that's sort of what you already knew, that discovery, you have to figure out the essential information. When you look at the studies, they almost always group together a number of approaches, of instructional approaches that are unguided or minimally guided. So things such as discovery or problem-based learning or inquiry learning or experiential learning or constructionist learning, those are the kind of approaches that would actually occur if a view of research was done on discovery or minimally or partially guided discovery. these types of approaches would be included in those reviews. One thing I'm going to just caution you, though, as you read these reviews that are posted at the end in terms of their references, you have to be very careful because many of them do not tell what population the studies were done on. And so some of the ones that were most positive about guided instruction with unguided instruction with discovery were actually done with people in college. For example, many of the studies were done in the medical profession. Well, we have to be careful. We're looking for studies that are done with elementary or secondary students, not with people who've gotten into and out of, in some cases, medical school. So I felt I went through and looked at all of the studies, the references, just to get an idea of what population they were talking about. All right, well, so let's start with that premise that students learn more from discovery. Let's look at the work of John Hattie, which we're all familiar with. And as you remember, John Hattie looks at meta-analyses and comes up with effect sizes, and generally from 0 to 1. And you can see that below 1, it has reverse effects in terms of the ongoing achievement of students. And when we get up to 0.4 to 1 and more, that is considered the zone of desired effects. For example, they're showing us here, teacher-student relationship in the class has an effect size of 0.72. So we had better greet the students at the door. We had better smile at them. We better have positive interactions with them in our classes. So let's look at this. And if you've recently gone to a training, you've seen it, but some of you have not recently gone. So let's look at this. So I went through the 2014, 2017, and 2018 reports of Hattie in terms of effect sizes. And first, I listed the effect sizes of elements that are part of explicit instruction. And so if we just go down the list, you're going to recognize these. So explicit teaching procedures, such as presenting things explicitly, having a perky pace, having active participation, having feedback, put all together, high effect size, 0.57. Direct instruction, which would include not just explicit instruction, but curriculum specifically written to support that, effect size of 0.60. Mastery learning. And so did we take things to not just exposure, but to mastery? And setting a goal for the lesson. And we might do that with learning intentions and success criteria. And clarity of what those goals are and what we are doing. The teacher asking questions during the instruction as a part of active participation, as well as having discussions. And I just want to remind us of the importance of feedback. Feedback given to a group, feedback given to individuals, and then practice. Deliberate practice with rehearsal, spaced over time, and that retrieval practice. So just look down there. These elements, when they were studied, made a difference and consistently made a difference above 0.40 in the zone of desired effects. Over here, we add to it scaffolding. If the goal is here and the students are here, we lift them up and scaffold them. And worked problems, where we go through a completed problem with students, particularly studied in math, step by step, showing students how to perform that. And response to intervention, if it's done very, very well, extraordinarily high effect size. Collective teacher efficacy, we all believe we make a difference, and it's collective. Everybody in my department, everybody in my grade level, everybody in my school believes they make a difference, and that their teaching makes a difference in terms of students, and that teacher-student relationship. Now, this was the most recent effect size I found for student-teacher relationship. The earlier one came from 2014, and so for some reason, some studies found it to still be above 0.40, still making a difference, but not as large as effect size. So then I included some comparisons. For example, whole language, where we expected students to discover, given rich information available to them, rich literature available to them, that has effect size of 0.06. Darn. Discovery-based teaching, 0.21. Problem-based learning, 0.26. Inquiry, 0.21. And student control over learning, 0.02. Students do better when we pick out what they're going to learn, that we structure the instruction. But right here, you get an idea of the comparison of the two just using Hattie's effect sizes. On one hand, we have explicit instruction used with, and his work is on achievement and school-age children. And all of these variables made a difference with those students. And on the other hand, we have low effect size in terms of discovery, problem-based inquiry, where we have to question, would that be something we want to do with students, or what do we need to add to it to increase that effect size? But right now, students deserve what will make the most difference in terms of their achievement. Well, let's explore this more. So we're going to look at what is the evidence, and then what should we do? So in Hattie's book on visible learning, he summarized this, and read it with me. Research shows that when teachers actively teach students, they have over 3 times the effect on students' results than they do when they try to facilitate learning. 3 times. If I was a student, I would want 3 times. And Mayer, in a very interesting article, talked about how this debate between discovery and explicit instruction has gone on again and again and again and again, and each time a more guided approach has been favored in the research. So I put these quotes in note so that you could follow up on them, but let's just look at the part that is in bold. So if we did reviews of research, minimally guided instruction is less effective and less efficient than instructional approaches that place a strong emphasis on guidance of the student's learning process. So again, this is looking at guided or minimally supported discovery is less effective than strong emphasis on guidance of student learning process as in explicit instruction. A very good research review. Now, this is really important though, because there are times where explicit instruction should be used and times where discovery might be successful. And I want us to really get this down, because it is not an either or, it is a when, it is a where, it is a what I'm teaching that makes a difference. So explicit instruction definitely has research to support it and should be used when we are teaching new information, meaning that I am learning something new and I am processing it through my working memory, which, as we'll see in a moment, is very limited. And I do not have a lot of information in permanent memory. So this could be anything. This could be across ages. This could be across grade levels. This could be across domains. When I'm teaching new information, explicit instruction is particularly supported. What else? Well, along with new information goes novices in any field. So if I am just learning information about the cello, then I am going to have someone very explicitly teach that so that I could totally concentrate on that information. So a novice makes a difference. What else makes a difference? Well, the third is if the student has had a history of failure, has not been able to obtain information with ease, then they particularly profit from explicit instruction. So we can actually look at the reverse of each of these. So if I'm teaching new information, explicit instruction, no matter the learner, no matter the domain. If I am teaching the additional information on something, the person has lots of background knowledge, then I definitely could use discovery. If I am teaching new students to a body of knowledge, they're a novice to biology, a novice to world history, a novice to learning letter sounds in kindergarten, then I better teach it very explicitly. When they become an expert, even if I am a student, I become an expert at sounding out words, I can generalize those strategies to other words and continue it through discovery. If I'm teaching struggling learners, explicit instruction. But if I am teaching students who have background knowledge, are an expert, and are not struggling, then I could utilize discovery. So it is very useful for us to understand that there is a place for it. Now we're going to look at new information, novice, struggling, and what the research would say about each of those. And so again, if we look at the reviews of research, and we look at one time where discovery is beneficial would be if they are not learning new information. But if you're learning novel information that is new to students, as this review summarized, students should be explicitly shown what to do and how to do it, and then have an opportunity to practice doing it while receiving corrective feedback. That sounds like I do it, we do it, you do it. And so I think that is exactly what they're saying. I have novel information. So I just took this first one and I said, well, let's look at the lessons that I have taught in the last year. So I write on my calendar when I do demonstrations what I taught. And all of these were new information. In kindergarten, letter sound associations, I taught a first grade lesson on figuring the meaning of a word using the context clues, using a simple strategy, inside, outside. Inside the words, you look for something that you might recognize, like a prefix or root, and then you look at outside, is there a meaning within the sentence? I taught the word productivity, and that was a word that most of the second graders had not heard, and most of the second graders had not pronounced, and so I had to teach the pronunciation and the meaning. I got to teach the concept of fractions to third grade. You know, I had to read the practice guide from IES on fractions just to be certain that I was going about it the right way. In fourth grade, I taught students to write this one I did in Australia, a coherent paragraph. Coherent, with a topic sentence that announced the topic and the most important idea. In fifth grade, this one I needed to go back and revise my lesson on to make it even more explicit, but the relationship between fractions and decimals. I taught a lesson on the causes of the Civil War. I taught plate tectonics. In high school, I taught universal themes, and we looked at different short stories and different actual novels that they'd read and what were the universal themes that were focused on. And then I taught, in the last 2 years, twice, I've had the gift of teaching DNA in high school biology. Now, that's all new information across grades, across domains, across ages, and all of them benefited because of the lack of knowledge that was in permanent memory. They benefited from explicit instruction. I had a wonderful time. The gift of my life is getting to teach things such as these. So I want you to chat and put your grade level in, or the job that you have, because we have many administrators on today. Great. And one grade level and one thing that you would have to teach explicitly. So if you'll put that in your chat box. And Nick, if you could let me see what they are chatting.
Sure. Just to let everybody know, if you go to the bottom of the slide, you should see a little blue circle with what looks like a chat bubble. If you click on that, it should open up on the right of the screen, and you can select to send a message in the chat box.
Thank you.
So from Vanessa Vasquez, she says, model lesson on estimation.
Estimation, excellent.
From Catherine Tarpey, I support all students with special needs in grades 9th through 12th.
So
Kindergarten, letter sounds, blending sounds to read words. That's from Carolyn.
great. Those and the special ed teacher definitely is teaching explicitly.
From Amy Garretts, and I apologize actually to anybody's name I missay. Teach teachers how to use explicit instruction appropriately.
Excellent. So someone who is explicitly teaching explicit instruction. Beautiful. Well, I'll read more of those later, but all of us have examples. All of us have examples of things where it's new information and would be best taught very explicitly. Well, the other, remember there's three criteria, three guidances in terms of when explicit instruction would be needed. New information, I'm teaching novices in the area of any content area, and number three is I am also teaching struggling students. So first one was I'm teaching new information. Second, I'm teaching novices. And I'm going to read when I stop, you say the next word. Decades of research clearly demonstrate that for novices, comprising virtually all students, direct explicit instruction is more effective and more efficient than partial guidance. I had to laugh when I read this because, of course, the explicit instruction book title is Explicit Instruction, Effective and Efficient Teaching. But for novices, it is particularly necessary. And this goes right back to our discussions during our trainings on working memory and long-term memory. Of course, as teachers, our goal is to move things into long-term memory. We want as much information, as much knowledge, as much strategies as possible in long-term memory to support our students in their academic work, as well as academic work beyond our school system and work beyond academics. So we want that in long-term memory. But the problem is we actually process and think and plan in working memory, not in permanent memory, and it is very limited in duration and capacity. So I went and I said, I want to know, well, what is the duration? What is the capacity? So let's look at some of that research, which some of it was done a good deal of time ago. In fact, this study done by Peterson and Peterson in 1959 has been repeated again and again and again. You get new information, like someone gives you a telephone number, and if it's not rehearsed, it's lost within 30 seconds. You learn the name of that senator who's speaking on the news, and if it's not rehearsed, if you don't say it, if you don't think it, if you don't write it, it's lost in 30 seconds. Wow, that is very limited duration. And then we've had studies that have looked at how many pieces of information can you hold in working memory at one time. This is the capacity. And so the study done in 1956 said that we could have 7 pieces of information in our working memory. However, Cohen's study in 2001 said 4. We are declining. Or perhaps the research technology became better to get a more accurate measure. So that's the problem, working memory, limited duration, limited capacity. So how does that work in terms of us responding to information? So when I am learning something new and my working memory is going to be very limited because it is not supported by information in long-term memory. And so if it's new information, then I need the support of explicit instruction to support my working memory until we move more information into long-term memory. And now, when I have working memory and I am learning information that is an extension of old information, thus it is supported by my long-term memory, then I'm not going to have as much of a challenge. So just read the last line with me. Partially or minimally guided instruction typically is ineffective for novices, but can be effective for experts. Ineffective for novices because of the fact that they don't have as much information in their long-term memory to support working memory, but it could be effective for experts who are packed full of information. And so this distinction is so useful for us between novices and experts, and between how working memory is supported or not supported in terms of new information as well as information added to what we already know. Well, so just to summarize this, so read the first one with me and go. Novices' only resource is their very constrained working memory. So if I'm just learning about DNA, or if I am just learning letter sounds in kindergarten, then I'm going to be working with my working memory, which is very constrained, very limited, both in terms of, going back here to remind you, duration and capacity. But I could be an expert, and then I have both working memory and all of that knowledge and skills that are stored in long-term memory. There is a place for discovery. It's with the experts. And then our third thing to look at are students that are struggling. And Martella did an excellent review in an article about adolescent literacy, but in it they did a really thorough review of instructional research. And I'm just going to read the bold part. Research universally supports explicit instructional practices, particularly when students are or struggling learners, that they would be supported by explicit instruction because it would set them up for success. It would show them how to do things. It would tell them how to do things. It would make it very clear, as clarity would be always present, and so that they would experience more success. Now, I want you just to take a moment and tell yourself a little retrieval practice before we go ahead of what we already know about explicit instructions use versus discovery, whether it is unguided discovery, minimally guided discovery, partially guided discovery, what we know about those two. So think how you would, without looking at your notes, how you would summarize that information. So I said to myself, well, if we looked at explicit instruction versus one of the variations on discovery, we would know first that the elements of explicit instruction have effect sizes that are in the zone of desired results, whereas the different instructional approaches are much lower effect sizes, and that there is a place for discovery, but it is not with new information. There we better have explicit instruction. Not with novice students. We better have explicit instruction. Not with struggling students, better have explicit instruction. But particularly if we have experts, then discovery does seem to have some merit. All right. Well, another question is, what should we do? And so as I read this article, it listed just in one paragraph exactly what we should do. It said when, and it's with academic literacy skills are taught, explicit instruction should be provided. And if you went through this, you would find these variables that you're so familiar with, that you would provide explicit instruction. And that means that there would be modeling, and I do it. There'd be guided practice, a we do it. I should have just went through the article and analyzed it. There'd be independent practice, you do it. There would be feedback given to individuals and the group that might be praise, it might be encouragement, it might be a correction. That you would have a gradual transfer of responsibility, which would be from I model it to I guide you in doing it to you doing it independently. There'd be scaffolding as necessary, and you'd be careful about a teacher-student interaction. So basically, in this article, they summarized exactly the elements that we work on in explicit instruction. So these articles are the ones that are referenced. And so if you go to where you get your PowerPoints for the TOT, I will put these articles up and a few extras so that you can read for yourself. But I want to add to this before we go on to the second myth, and that is I am particularly getting asked questions about one of the instructional approaches under discovery of problem-based learning. And this one I just see flying across our country, particularly in science and particularly in math. And so let's just take a little look at it. So read with me just a quick explanation of problem-based learning, and probably you're already familiar with it. Some authentic problems to solve authentic problems or acquire complex knowledge in info-rich settings based on the assumption that having learners construct their own solution leads to the most effective learning experience. So the students are, from the very get-go, given an authentic problem to solve, and they're given rich information available to them, whether it's information to read or information to listen to, and they usually work in cooperative groups to solve this problem. And now we've always used problems, authentic problems even, but usually they have not been introduced for the purpose of teaching knowledge, but rather applying knowledge. And so this is from a recent book written by Dylan William, a 2018 book, and he talks about authentic problems being used in our courses. And go to the second paragraph. I'm going to read when I stop. You say the next word. Where students already have a great deal of knowledge about the subject at hand, practice in applying this is useful. But if the necessary background knowledge is not present, then investigative or authentic tasks are often ineffective. This is particularly true for practical work in science education. I really recommend It's a great read, this book is. Now, so the challenge here is that it is not the task that is the problem. It is that the students will not necessarily have the background knowledge to be able to solve that problem. And the effect size is fairly low for problem-based learning. Now, this is a most recent review, which was 0.15. Another one that Hattie had was 0.21. These just changed because of the studies that are included in the analysis. But let's remember that to solve any problem, it takes knowledge, it takes concepts, it takes skills, it takes strategies. Any problem needs that. And I'm just going to use, because I'm sitting in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, I'll use an event that occurred this fall. I had been traveling for a considerable amount of time in Australia, and I came back, and Jonathan, my assistant, sent me a message saying that our washing machine was not working. And he realized that I would have to wash my clothes on the day I came home because I was going to fly out the next day. And he said two things. Number one, I have coming in the morning on Saturday, I have a person that is going to, an expert in washing machines, and he's going to see if he could fix it. But if it's not fixable, I have a second plan, and that I have gone to a number of different stores, and I have found the washer-dryer set that's going to cost us a number of thousands of dollars, but it'll exactly fit in this space, which is a limited space right around the corner here. And so I said, thank you, Jonathan. I'm so blessed by Jonathan supporting me in all my travels and my work. So Jason, who was the expert, was going to come on Saturday morning. So I came down early in the morning and I looked at the manual. I thought, maybe I could figure it out. Maybe I could read. Maybe I could follow the directions. Maybe I could fix it. Well, no, I have no knowledge. I have no concepts of vocabulary. I have no skills. I have no strategies. There was no hope. None, no hope. So Jason came, Jonathan came too, and so I explained to Jason that I looked over the manual and I didn't have a clue about how to fix it. And he said, well, I'm in my early 30s, and I've been working with my father, who's the owner of our company, since I was 14. I think I can figure this out. And later, when he signed his invoice, he signed it chip off the old block, meaning his father. Okay. And so he walked over to the washing machine, and he turned one knob on, and he said, oh, just as I expected, there are two parts here that can easily break, and both of them have. I said, how would you know that? Well, he had knowledge, he had vocabulary, he had skills, he had strategies. He said, I could feel it and hear it. I said, really? Yep. It can take two parts. I have them out in my car. I have them out there, and in fact, mine aren't plastic. Mine are metal, so it's a good replacement. You want to keep this machine. You don't want to get one with a lot of computer parts to it. No, you want a mechanical washing machine. Okay. And he said, should I go get him? I said, yes, rush out. So he came back and he put in the two parts. It worked beautifully. And there I got to see the benefit of having knowledge, vocabulary, skills, and strategies to solve a problem. But this leads us directly to some of the work that's been done on research in problem-based instruction. So this was in Hattie's recent book, The 10 Mind Frames for Visible Learning, Teaching for Success. And basically, what this meta-analysis found is that problem-based learning could have an impact on student performance if implemented at the right time. And so I'm going to read, and when I stop, say the next word. Look at the bold. The right time is not while the students are still in the domain of surface understanding, where problem-based learning can even have a negative effect. But once they have reached the domain of deep understanding. The problem here is not the actual tasks, it's the placement of the tasks. Not the actual task, but the placement of the task. In other words, problem-based learning will have an effect only if the learners have already acquired the necessary knowledge base to complete the task at levels of transfer and problem solving. This was so useful for me. So again, it is not an either or. It is not discovery or explicit instruction. It is when and where and what. And here it is the timing. And so we would want explicit instruction to precede that authentic problem solving, so that the students would have enough knowledge. And I saw this very vividly in a lesson that I observed. It was a middle school math class, probably sixth grade, sixth or seventh. And the teacher brought in this beautiful, large, actual manual. And I'm going to write down the actual thing that was there. So in this manual, he opened it up and he had made copies for the students. And it was a plan for an apartment building. And it had some of the dimensions of the walls, and the students, with a cooperative group, were asked to figure out the number of square feet of carpeting that they needed to order for the construction of this apartment house. Some rooms were not going to get carpet, many rooms were going to get carpet, and some of the measurements were given. Now, that sounds pretty exciting. I would really like to do that. I think that would be fun for me to figure out. We just love those kind of problems. The only challenge here is that the students did not know square feet. They did not know how, if you had one measurement and there was a parallel measurement, that it would be the same, so they could fill in all the missing measurements. They had not practiced previously on small rectangular shapes, more complex shapes, leading up to the definite complexity of the shapes in this apartment house. And so I watched the kids. They were not excited about it. They got frustrated. They started texting under the table. They started talking on topics other than how are we going to figure this out. And in almost every group, there was one or two kids that ended up working on the project while the others talked or did other things. Now I said to myself, if the teacher had only provided the explicit instruction first, and so that the students looked at this and said, oh my gosh, I can figure it out. Sort of like all of the word games I play. Oh, I can do this. This is exciting. But it's not exciting if you don't have the knowledge, the vocabulary, the skills, and the strategies. So it goes in place. So I want you just to take a moment and say to yourself, what would be the big outcomes you'd want to remember in terms of problem-based learning? Think about it. So I said to myself, well, problem-based learning and those kind of tasks, those authentic tasks, could make a positive difference if it was preceded by explicit instruction on any knowledge that was needed, vocabulary that was needed, skills that were needed, strategies that were needed. And then we get the glory of figuring out something that makes us as humans think and problem solve, but we can do it. See, motivation is that sweet spot when I look at a task and it's a little bit more challenging, but I know I can do it. If I look at a problem and I say, there's no way I can do this, then my motivation plummets. Well, that is our first one. And let's move on. And here is the second myth. Now, you would think that this one would have been answered long, long ago and no longer visible. But it is. So you know that at the beginning of many of our trainings, I have people list what are the critical aspects we need to consider in instruction on new information, instruction to novices, instruction to struggling students. And consistently in this last year, I had, what is their learning style? 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 So I thought we should all be prepared and empowered with a review of research in this area. So, so there is some assumptions for people who have heard about learning style, have read about learning style, have gotten materials about learning style, have curriculum material that is designed around learning style. And so their assumption is, and read it with me, each of us has a specific learning style, a preference, and we learn best when information is presented in that style. So this is the assumption under learning styles, is that I have a learning style preference, and I will learn more if I'm taught with that style. It could be a visual learning style. It could be auditory. It could be kinesthetic. And then there's many other variations as you read that research. So, going along with this is the idea that I am going to learn best if I'm taught in that style. And we got them there, and see if I can get this to move on. All right, there we go. So what is the evidence? So we've got an immense number of studies in this area, and the evidence is very strong. So although the presumption of matching instructional strategies to individual modality preferences has great intuitive appeal, little empirical support for this proposition was found. Neither modality testing nor modality teaching were known to be effective. So we've got two problems. One is figuring out, are you visual, are you auditory, are you kinesthetic? But then if I teach you with your preferred style, will you learn more? And so both of these were found not to be effective. So this is really important because this became such an ongoing conflict of should we teach with learning styles and teach with learning styles and teach with learning styles, that the Psychological Science in the Public Interest, it's an agency, commissioned 4 excellent, respected university cognitive psychologist types to do a review of research in this area. And this was their summary. So get ready to say the missing words. The contrast between the enormous popularity of the learning styles approach with education and the lack of credible evidence for its utility is, in our opinion, striking and disturbing. So, lots of popularity, but no evidence to support it. Now, I decided that I would go back to the first study on this question, 1957. It was done by Barbara Bateman. Barbara Bateman with Samuel Kirk are sort of the mother-father figures in the area of learning disabilities. And Barbara Bateman wanted to ask this question. If we determined your preferred learning style. If you believed you were, and we tested you, and you were visual or you were auditory, and you got instruction in that area, then we would find that because you were taught with your preferred style, that you would learn more. So she did this with beginning reading. Now, so here we have students with a visual preference, and if they got a visual method, we would expect that they would do very well. If they got an auditory method, that they would not do as well. We would expect that if they had an auditory preference and they got a visual method, that they wouldn't do well, but they would do well with an auditory method. Okay, so this is the kind of study that has been started in 1957, but repeated and repeated and repeated with different groups, different domains, different topics, but always asking this question. If there was a preferred learning style, and you were taught with that preference, that style, that method, would you do better? Well, let's look at this study, which just reflects what has occurred again and again. So you had a visual preference. We're thinking you'd do better if you had the visual method, but no, there was higher attainment when you had the auditory method. You had an auditory preference in terms of learning. Now we would think that you would do better with an auditory method, and sure enough, you did. But both groups did better with the auditory method. Her conclusion was that we could obviously learn from either auditory or visual, but that in this case, it was the method that you did best with was related to what we're teaching, not the learner. What we're teaching you is letter-sound associations, which very definitely involves hearing the phonemes within the words and matching them to the grapheme. And then being able to do orthographic mapping in which you sounded out the word and then blended the sounds together in phonological memory. And so perhaps the modality has more to do with what I'm teaching than the learner. Well, what should we do? Well, first, given the lack of scientific evidence, the use of learning style tests and teaching tools is a wasteful use of limited educational resources. And so I'm just going to have to summarize that. And they're still so available, and people are still spending big bucks on learning style tests and parallel teaching tools that we just have no research to support. But what we should do, as Willingham suggests, we should match the modality to the content. So I just used an example here. So visually, if I was teaching you to examine borders on maps and look at all of the other information given on a map, that's very visual. If I am teaching you reading comprehension strategies, I might show you the strategy steps visually, and we might read, certainly involves vision. If I'm teaching you geometry and we're looking at acute and obtuse shapes, then I'm going to make it very visual. If I'm teaching you letter sounds, I'm going to use an auditory method of instruction. If I'm having you sing, we better be listening to it. If I'm teaching you a foreign language, I'm going to think about the modality of auditory. And once I did in Santa Fe take classes in actually clay work, sculpture, that's very kinesthetic. Handwriting is kinesthetic, typing is kinesthetic, and oftentimes multiple modalities, of course, would be used. But the modality is more related to the content than to the learner. And so there are, of course, times where multiple exposures are needed, a variety of methods and modalities. Now, TED Talk has an excellent, I'm talking an excellent TED Talk on learning styles. So I just so recommend that you do it. And one of the, and Tessia had one example I thought was perfect, and it was learning about football. How, okay, I need to learn about football, so I could watch football games, I could read football plays, I could listen to a coach coaching, I could have kinesthetic exposure modalities, I could play football. I looked at that and I laughed and I said, well, I don't need to know that much about football. I'll watch a game or two. I did watch the national championship not too many weeks ago, and oh my goodness, Clemson won. Too bad, Alabama. And so that's about all the football I've learned. And now, this to me is really interesting because people would say, well, you're going to store the information visually, or you're going to store it auditorily, or you're going to store it in a kinesthetic manner. But actually, what we are storing is the meaning. And I love this study, and this study was done with expert chess players. I mean, we're talking really up there, and novice chess players. And so first, they gave them a board, and they looked at it for, I think, 5 seconds, very quickly, and then they had to place on another board, these same players had to put the same pieces down. And this first time they did it, it was organized in a way that would represent where chess parts might actually be placed on a board. And the experts got an average of 20 pieces, and the novices 4 pieces that they put over on this board. And that's when the pieces were organized as they would often be organized on a chessboard. So here, the advantage went to the experts because the experts had in their background knowledge constant looking at different ways that the pieces might be on a chessboard, and the novices didn't. But then, when they randomly placed the pieces on the chessboard, the experts had no advantage over the novices. So it just reminds us that the way we store information is by meaning, but also reminds us how important it is to have all that information in our permanent memory. So if it's stored in terms of meaning, instead of looking at learning styles as a big educational hope, we better look at explicit instruction. We'll teach those facts and strategies and concepts explicitly because most of our kids are novices. We teach new information and often teach struggling students. And I really recommend a book by Graham his last name is Nuthall. I wrote that down wrong, so Nuthall. And in his research, he showed that students had to have 3 complete exposures to information to ensure learning. And, of course, we need practice, deliberate practice, spaced practice, retrieval practice, so that we have the information available. We know so much more than learning styles. And this is where we're going to end today, that basically what this research would say is that we can learn auditory, we can learn visual, we can learn kinesthetically, and from all of those different styles. We're not just one that we have to learn from. And it also reminds us that you and I and our students are definitely more the same than we are different. Well, I hope this reminds you of these 2 critical myths or misconceptions, and also how to respond to them. So there are the references. I'll put those up in a folder so that you can read the original articles. So the next one, I already have 3 people who requested that I do research on what would be myths in their school district, misconceptions perhaps. So if you have one that you want me to write about, just whip me an email at archerteach@aol.com and I will put it on my list. It was a delight. And thank you for being on the webinar and making me study and study and study some more so I can convey this information. Nick, do we have anything we need to do at the end?
Let me see. No, I see some thank yous from everyone. You can open it up for questions to see if anybody has anything to add or ask. But we're just about out of time, so maybe we'll pick that up next time.
All right. And may you have a beautiful January and beyond. And remember, this has been recorded, so if you have a colleague who you think it might be useful to, of course, let them watch it too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Nick.